Hi, my name's Justin Coleman, co-founder and COO of the Alliance of Sport. It's a pleasure to be here today. It's quite strange. I'm not usually used to doing sort of online presentations and whatnot, so please forgive me and bear with me if you could. I can see that there's at the moment a couple of participants here, I'll just crack on. So basically, yeah, I guess we're here to talk about the theory of change, or a theory of change, and then putting it into practice, and vice versa, using the practice to inform our theory of change. So yeah, but like I said, my name's Justin Coleman, and what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to, sorry, again, bear with me. I'm going to go back to the first point, I guess, of where we are at the moment, which is just around, I guess, introductions. As I said, I work for an organisation by the name of the Alliance of Sport in criminal justice, and what we do is we look after young people, older people, etc., that are all residents of or included in the criminal justice system here in the UK. We support organisations around the country and around the EU and internationally, such areas such as the US and Hong Kong sometimes as well. And what we do, for example, is we'll help the infrastructure, look at prison programs and things, and using sport in a sense, in the wider context of sport to help. I think what we've got here is the first part of this is I'm just going to ask you, if you don't mind, in the chat box itself, if you could just put your first name, your club or your organisation that you work for, and where you think this particular football pitch on the slide at the moment is. So in other words, where you think this football pitch is based. And then it would be really good if you could answer that. So your first name, your club or organisation, and where you think this pitch is, and I'll answer that question in a minute. But meanwhile, whilst you're doing that, I will certainly try my best to kind of explain roughly what a theory of change is and how long it took us to sort of oh, brilliant. Okay, so yeah, thank you. Just see there we've got Gurko here, so that's brilliant. Good to see you again, Gurko, or good to be speaking to you again. In relation to and Palace for Life, great, brilliant, in the UK, lovely. And also when it comes to the theory, and anyone there got any ideas on the actual pitch itself? Okay. Okay, so what we're going to, so the theory of change is, in a nutshell, what we've been doing for, I guess, the past 4 years now as an organisation is kind of developing, brilliant, been doing, yeah, it's at the bottom of the notes of the presentation, great. I'm glad that I'm doing the right thing here and making it easy for you rather than not. So I'm going to move on to the next slide, I think. When it comes to originally sort of the steering group on the 23rd of September 2015, what we did from this date and over the next 2 years subsequently after that was that we listened to and interacted with over 500 organisations with over 300 sport for good interested people. So when I say that, it's sort of multiple sports and various other things, and those that are interested in people, and then 300 people with lived experience of the criminal justice system. Now, lived experience for me isn't just about those that were, should we say, in the criminal justice system around, those that have committed crime, but those that have also had crime committed against them. So we were listening to the whole spectrum, so those that go into court, witnesses, etc., as well, as to what sport could do to offer some support to them. And as you can see in the group here that we were holding at the time, which was the steering group, the steering group was made up of a number of organisations and some football, as you can see there, so the EFL Trust at the time, English Football League Trust. Then we also have some academic organisations, some youth work organisations, some lived experience organisations and infrastructure organisations that came together, and Public Health England, some government offices. We came together and we decided that we needed to know what our map looked like. So basically, where, and I think you might have heard this today already a few times on the theory of changes. Where are you now? So where are we right now as an organisation back on 23rd of September 2015? Where were we at the time, and then where did we want to go? What do we want this organisation and this particular infrastructure organisation, if you want, called the Alliance of Sport? Where do we want that to go? What do we want that to look like, and what was the journey? And then really, how are we going to get there in between? And by looking at it that way, we started to realise that the organisations we had around the table, as you can see there from Family Lives, and Clinks, which are organisations in the middle, UNICEF, etc., A lot of them had a lot of wealth of expertise that we need to put into a room. And then all the people that we spoke to along the way basically enabled us to build a theory of change, which is, when you look at the theory of change in a minute, it's very evident, it's very simple, it's very clear, if you will, as to the journey that we can take someone and organisations on. In other words, this isn't just about a person, it could be about a organisation as well, and how we can help them best. Now, this is a sector-wide theory of change. So the sector-wide theory of change in the end, and I'll go back to how and why and etc. in a minute, but this is the theory. And if we enable a journey through this framework, we enable sort of positive journeys and outcomes. So basically, we start with the engagement part. So on the left there, which is here, you can see engagement. Now, an approach, when I say engagement, an approach might be a public health approach. It might be a youth work approach, or it could be a social work approach, or it could be a criminal justice approach. It depends on where you're coming from as to what you do. Now, in this context, in the football context, it might be a purely a football approach. So that's your engagement strategy. You're going to use football to engage. That's fine. Then what we're going to, so that might be it might be just your brand that you use as the approach. It could be social media that we use in there as an approach, etc. So just so you're aware, this as a sector, we're looking at this part here and saying, actually, where do we start? So how do we first engage those clients? Then we go through this part of the journey here, and we end up with, so this is where the first part of our engagement, if you will, whilst we've done engagement here, but the first part of where we use our kind of thinking and strategy is we start to look at the physical and mental well-being of those that we are working with in and around those areas. So it could be a family, for example, or it could be an individual that we're targeting. So the physical and the mental well-being of someone is really important. What do we do? I mean, how do we start to look at that? We might do fitness sessions. In our case at the moment, there's a huge drive on sort of basically food. So we're trying to give young people food, healthy meals, etc. A lot of clubs are involved with this at the moment, and food banks and things like that at the moment are being used. That could be part of the physical and mental well-being strategy, if you will, that we adopt. So we'll come to a list of things underneath the physical and mental well-being that we would do in order to make sure that we're fulfilling the physical and mental well-being of our clientele. We then take that across, and the next step would be the individual development. So the individual development, if you will, around here is something where we start to look at the human being in front of us, the individual, and ask them, what is it you want to achieve? Where do you want to go? Now that we've got you a bit more fitter and a bit more healthier, whether it be physical activity, food, sleep, etc., that we focused on here, we then use that momentum, if you will, on that platform to step forward and then into the individual's development. That might be around emotional management. So in other words, you might have some serious issues around trauma, things like that as well. We can start to look at how we manage that and how they manage that, introducing positive peers so they've got a good example to follow. So we'd just say some homeless charities that I work with, for example, that use football. It's amazing to see the actual members of staff having an influence on the men and the women that they're working with. By just being solid people that have been there and done it, but have now moved on, and they can have that influence on that individual's development, because they'll enable them to realise that they can achieve, there is a way out of where they are, if you will. Coming then through to the education and training, going back to the education, training and employment, I think really of where we're looking at this now is that we're not just talking about those that are clients, those that are participants, if you will, of the services, but we're also looking at those, maybe the staff, the volunteers, etc., that are around our services. How do we use our education and training frameworks to enhance and sort of keep those things going and sort of the development happening? What we then got on the right-hand side here is social and community development. Now, whilst we've had a member of staff and our participants trained up here, what we're then taking them through to is the social and community development, which is basically what our goals. So here there was a goal set, and what was their goal in society? What did they want to achieve? And that's our end result, if you will. It never ends. Obviously, better never stops in the words of the Olympics. But when it comes to the social and the community development, we're trying to get someone we'll take the homeless concept, if you want, or a criminal. The homeless concept is that we try and give them somewhere to live at the end of this, where they can live sustainably. So they would have gone through this journey, this platform here, starting with engagement through to physical and mental well-being, into individual development, then through to education, training, and employment, and then into some form of positive social and community development outcome. So whilst we're on that, bear with me 1 second. My computer's a bit slow, so please bear with me. Now, whilst this looks very complicated, I can change this. It's complex flow, and academics we've been looking at this academically a lot, and so there's a lot of theory and everything else that's starting to be generated behind all of this. I didn't want to go into this too much at the moment because we're going to build one in a bit. But where we've got the start here, basically this little bubble here says, I don't want you to like me, trust me, or respect me. The reason we start with that is we'll start with a level playing field if you want, and it'll be around where are you, as in the participant, where are you right now, and where do we need to take you? So we'd ask them about goal setting. So this is all part of this engagement process and the approaches that we take towards that. The physical and mental well-being, which is here. Underneath that, we would look at areas then that we can help develop a person so that they feel safer, so that they can protect people around them, etc. Once they've got to that protective factor, if you want, they can move into the individual development side of things because they'll feel like they can open up. And then we would take them through these processes. Naturally, sport does this. And we'll go through this in a minute, don't worry. It's not, this is just something we've been working on in the background. Education and training and employment, we would help them then develop their new skills for training, progression into education, and from that education and progression into volunteering and employment. That doesn't have to be in the sector, that could be sort of just in stable employment, etc. And then the social and community development side of things, then we would help them improve their social skills so they can fit into social networks, improve peer relationships and friendships, and then improved opportunities, basically, which should, as an outcome, the way that we would look at this in a theory of change sense is that we want to see a prosocial citizen, someone who's sustainably living in our societies together. So the maintenance of that obviously is a difficult thing because we always have relapse. So, in a sense, I would say always have relapse. We can have relapse in circles. So sometimes this might fit in a linear, it might be a zigzag, it could be ups and downs that people go backwards and forwards. However, with a theory of change, what we're trying to do is show a road map. It doesn't always necessarily, it won't always be that way, if you see what I mean. We won't necessarily say, right, we're going to engage someone, then we're going to give them physical and mental well-being, then we're going to give them individual development, then education, training, employment, then this. It might be that we come in, and we do need to look at engagement first, but then they might need education and training as a first port of call, but we still know that we need to work on this area here. So it just allows us to start to map what a good journey might look like, but that doesn't mean that's the only journey, if you see what I'm saying here. And then when it comes to, bear with me again. So I wondered if there was any questions so far, because that's quite a lot of detail. And one thing I'm quite conscious of is I don't want to waffle on ahead and then it kind of doesn't mean anything in the short term. So if there are any questions, please feel free to ask them. Meanwhile, just ask the question. I'm going to go back to the previous slide and just explain something else. And if something comes up, I'll answer that question then, or we'll move on. Okay, so if I go back one, so basically at the moment, so when it comes to this bit here, we're looking, so if the questions come in, I will stop talking now and answer that. But no matter the age and the gender, we're aiming for the prosocial citizen. No matter what football clubs do or anything else, I guess, within the framework here, is that when it comes to football in of itself, what we do is, I guess, we'll be doing all of these things in various sort of stages of someone's growth. Now, initially, I'm just thinking of the UK context here, engagement might be football through what we would call the Kicks programme, the Premier League Kicks. Premier League Kicks has now started up a mentoring programme. So that mentoring programme would help look at the individual's development as well. So whilst they're attending Kicks, they'll also be having mentoring. Within the Kicks programme and framework, there's also every month there might be some sessions, for example, here in education training. There'll be some accredited and non-accredited workshops, etc., that are developed. Meanwhile, what's happening, which is part of the journey, I guess, is that we're then looking at social and community development here. Just bear with me. The social and community development that's here, which would then mean that those participants, if you will, within the Kicks programme, get the benefit of all of this just through football alone, which means that ultimately they then fit into a team. So this would be a team here where they may even then start to become a coach themselves, and they might go back to supporting people back through this journey. Okay, I can't see any questions at the bottom. Again, if there are any questions, please feel free. There is a bit of a lag on our part here, so that's fine, and I'll go back to any slide that you want me to if there are any questions. If there are not, I'm going to continue. So here is an example of where we're coming from, I guess, from the Alliance of Sport perspective. What does good look like in practice? Good in of itself at the moment, I'm just going to give you a quick example here in prison. This is good practice, if you will, within a prison environment anyway. This gentleman here on the right-hand side is our trained mentor. So he's a resident of the prison, and he was serving a long-term sentence at the time. We trained him up as a mentor, as a teacher. So he was also a tutor inside the establishment. He had his football badges, his rugby badges, and some of his personal fitness badges as well. And then basically he would run sessions like this within sort of this sort of environment here. So that's a prison environment where they'd be playing football, training, doing development, and they'd be looking at goal setting for the individual here, who's the mentee. So this mentee, it was his job to make sure that he feels included within this environment and that there's no bullying going on, etc., within the prison. So for us, that is good practice. Now, all the things that we mentioned just now around the theory of change are within this picture, if you will. So we've got the education, training, and employment side of things as well, because this gentleman here is now being trained up to be employed when he gets released. He's got work experience, etc., that we're generating from inside. This person here's physical and mental well-being is being looked after by this individual, and there's physical and mental well-being in the background there. Now, that's what good practice looks like in a prison context. Obviously, within the context of other organisations and theories of change, we have to use the context that we're in to ensure that we can sort of map out some of the activity that's going on, so that it makes sense to the beneficiary, which might be the participant, or in this case, the mentor and the participants. They all benefit in some way, shape, or form. Now, just quickly moving on, this is a golf example. I haven't got any football examples at the moment because we're going to build one in a minute, and I kind of wanted you to think of that. But this is Golf for Good theory of change. There's the Kendallshire Kids Foundation, which is just down the road from where I am currently in Bristol. Basically, they've used the theory of change to create themselves a Golf for Good development course. And what that means is they're going to take all of their young people, and this is just something to apply to football. If you thought about it this way, you may be able to see something in phases, in coaching techniques, etc., that you might be able to apply a theory of change to, so that it makes sense for your game, for the sport, etc. In this context, golf. Just here, they've got the first hole, and then that would be the fitness, so physical fitness hole. And for example, then that might be a par 4. So what they're going to do within that is build a framework in there, which has got 4 activities that young people need to do in order to get their box ticked, if you will, for that particular hole, so that they can start to come in and under their par, etc. Now, in football context, it might be that you look at, from a goalkeeper right the way through to a striker, and then the striker scoring the goal, and the ball in between is the young person or the people that you're working with. And each step that they go through, each pass, means they're closer to their goal. So you could use that in a sense of a theory of change as well. This is what's happened here in the golf club. The theory of change sits behind this, so that we can then start to bracket these off and start to get some of these holes looking at engagement, individual development, education, training, and social community development, etc. So that's one example of how a theory of change could influence. The next part there, I'm just going to show you this one because this is a bit more evident and clear. I'm just going to be very quick with this as well. This part here, so where the whistle is right the way through to the cup, is the theory of change that I showed you just now. So that's very much the engagement, physical, mental well-being, the individual development, education, training, volunteering, and employment in this case because of the context that we're working in, and then the social and community cohesion. So the idea is that we are looking at leveling the playing field, which is a project that we're developing at the moment. My apologies for this being not done up yet. We're still waiting for the graphics to be done at the moment, but it's very clear. We've got the mission and vision at the top, which is around physical activity to improve the health and life outcomes of all participants who are at risk of entering or already involved with the criminal justice system. So the idea is that what we would do is by our over-representation here, for example, in criminal justice, for those racial disparities, so your Black, Asian, minority ethnic groups at the moment are over-represented in criminal justice, but they're under-represented in physical activity. So we're looking to balance this out, hence the title 11 in the playing field. So what we're actually doing here is we're increasing physical activity And then by doing that, we should decrease overrepresentation in the criminal justice system because we've got more people engaged than not. When it comes to empowering the engagement, in this case, the approach that we're using is a health promotions, public health approach. There are violence reduction public health approaches. There are all sorts of approaches, as I said earlier on. But in this context, in this case, we are using a health promotions public health approach. And that allows us to operate under the sort of Sport England framework of sticking with it, sort of your behaviour change and whatnot that we're looking at here as well. And we're able to map across to the 3 tiers of primary, secondary and tertiary interventions. So we can start to then record who we're intervening with and how we're helping them. Then what we're going to do is promote physical and mental well-being. We're going to promote examples of that. We're going to promote healthy lifestyles, and we're going to do that through the cohort of people that we're working with down here, which I'll come to in a minute. And then we're enhancing, so individual development. So that's enhancing motivation, enhancing emotional management. So in other words, we're enabling through sport and physical activity and role models, the ability for people to see how people conduct themselves, etc. And we're enhancing resilience and enhancing self-belief within the young people that we're working with. And this is a very much a 11,200 young people that we're working with that are from the main Black, Asian, minority ethnic sort of groups, if you will, across the UK in 4 areas. So basically it's 2 nations, that's England and Wales, 9 cities, 1 town, inside 5 youth offending, 5 YOIs, 2 secure training centres and 1 secure children's home. We're supporting a minimum of 75 organisations through this model, and then sort of be over 500 staff and volunteers who are working together to help the 11,200 young people. And what that enables us to do is make sure that we can start to use this framework here to measure our impact. When I say ours, the collective 500 staff and volunteers impact. And we can get data to come back to actually start populating this, which is perfect for our funders, but I think for us as a team. So as all of us then can start to see where we are and how we're actually starting to manage our, I guess, our participants, if you want, and also the communities in which we're working. So these 9 cities, 1 town, 5 sort of YOIs, the secure training centres and the secure children's home. We're just trying to look at, okay, so how can we best help them in terms of kind of measurement. And we now know that this fits into the criminal justice system and it also fits into the community. So we're operating on the right level. The activities at the bottom, if you will, so the things actually on the ground might be different, but the ways in which we're recording them will be very, very, very similar and will align so that we can then start to evidence impact and obviously demonstrate the change that we're making. Now, I've just noticed the time, which is great. So this one, I'm going to slow down a little bit now. This is where I need, if you can, and you're listening and you're kind of there and able to, is to be able to interact with you a little bit. So it's about sharing, and we're going to try and build a theory of change based on the activities that you do in your local areas, in your clubs, or in your prisons, in Gurko Sense or Palace for Life and sort of Norway. So Jason Blackpool as well, and we've got Hazard. Okay, no. So Blackpool, there's a few organisations on the call at the moment. And if you can, it's really just to see if we can build a quick framework and just some activities that are ongoing at the moment within your organisations through the framework that I've mentioned. What I will do at the end of this is I will then basically look at the impact framework, if you will, and I will populate your activity across to that and then send it back out to you as a collective, so that if you were to offer football within your community or across the communities here in the European Football for Development Network, and it's clear how we can start to populate a theory of change, for example, that you operate in. So our first question, and I guess if you could in the chat box, and I'll leave this up for a bit, is please if you could share what approaches you take to engage with your participants. So going back to the engagement part is, like I said, within the Golf for Good example, they're using a trauma-informed approach to engage their young people. As I said, then within the level and the playing field side of things, we're taking a public health approach. So they're very different approaches. They're both based on kind of health needs, if you want, but through different frameworks. So if you don't mind, just basically populate what it is that your organisation, what approaches you might take. There might be a youth work approach, it could be educational, or it could just be straightforward football coaching, and that's fine as well, because it gives you a framework and a place to start. And that's how and where you might start with your clientele, your young people, your old people, your people in between, and what missions you're taking, if you will. So yeah, I guess the engagement element of that is that we found this is probably one of the more trickier areas, and I am going to keep talking until I see things pop up, but it's one of the more trickier areas to sort of think through sometimes when you're in the community and you're dealing with things, because there are so many different types of approaches. We need to look sometimes at kind of partnerships. When you're looking at partnerships with the police, for example, or you're looking at partnerships with health, they are very different approaches. And with those partnerships, we can start to do we start to do different things, if you will. So we start to be able to do different programs through the initial engagement that we offer. So within a prison context, if I'm working with the healthcare team, my engagement would be very different than it would be if I was working with the prison officer team, if you will, because more often than not that people speak to. That's great, actually. We've got some feedback coming in, which is good. We basically start to operate with the residential team, so that the staff on the landings, for example, are very much around, I guess, an authoritarian approach. So whilst we've got, and thank you, Jason. Basically, you've got Blackpool FC saying that peer support is an approach that you were taking. That's perfect. So that's partnership approach. That's perfect as well from Jason. Thank you very much. Traditional sports facilitation and engagement. This is brilliant. This is really good. So, and what we're looking at here is there's a partnership approach to this, and who you might work with is really important. Like I said, the more partners you have involved, the more interesting, the more, I guess, that you can use football or not in some cases for that engagement initially. It depends. If it was with the police directly, it might be difficult to go into a high crime area with the police if you and use that. However, you might still do that in partnership and be the conduit that enables those young people to trust someone in that relationship. I'm saying that on a trust level to start with. Okay, so that's great. Let's move on to the next one. Thank you for that feedback, by the way, Jason, at the moment. Second slide down is looking at physical and mental well-being. Exactly the same process, if you don't mind, is just populate what you do. That's great. And we're looking here at obviously how you support physical and mental well-being within your participants. So that could be sporting, supporting the training and exercise, conduct well-being assessments where you focus on diet, nutrition, and sleep. It's those kind of things where you think as an organisation, what do you offer your clients, your people, your participants, your young people, etc. If you offer them sort of space, time out, etc. Maybe even I've known some schools, for example, PIUs that offer, it sounds a bit daft, but it's not. It works at a treat. Is that they'll offer a 30-minute sort of sleep break and things like that during the day, so that young people can calm themselves down and just rest. It's those kinds of things that help the well-being and the learning then of their young people, and growth of their kind of education, if you will, because they're able to calm down enough to learn. So yeah, I guess we're just talking about how you would support physical and mental well-being of within your participants. Great. No, that's we've got lived experience approach as well here coming through. So the physical and mental well-being, I guess I'm assuming that's associated to this. If so, then yeah, we could use lived experience within this area as well as the engagement area as well. So physical and mental well-being, the role model side of this helps a great deal. And what that would do is it would enable sort of lived experience. It would enable a good example, if you want, of someone's physical and mental well-being and how they can manage themselves through different processes. Yep, and then thank you for that, Julia. We've got an introduction into self-care methods. Perfect. That's absolutely brilliant because it becomes self-sustainable as well then. So you're teaching them something in the sense of how they might manage their physical and mental well-being. I'm assuming, and this is an assumption, you all do football with these your participants in some way, shape or form, physical activity and sport in some way, and that is where this would fit. Okay. Brilliant. So Scort Foundation, okay, brilliant. Okay, so Introduction to Self-Care Methods is from the Scort Foundation in Switzerland, superb. And I'm assuming at this point as well, healthy lifestyle in general, brilliant, okay. And I think healthy lifestyle also, when we're looking at football in the context, is that football in of itself and playing it, etc., is an incredibly powerful tool. You have your highs, your lows, everything else, and physical and mental well-being. I've worked with some, for example, homeless men in sort of Oxford area at one point, and every time you scored a goal, they were free for a minute, just free. They were kind of, there was nothing else that mattered except for that goal, or the saving of a goal, if you will. So a goalkeeper, whatever, and it was the thing they lived for the most. And I think that's really important to value and recognise too. Okay, thank you for that. I am going to move on to the next slide because I'm conscious of time. So the following slide here would be the individual's development. My apologies for this here. Obviously, there's a few issues with my. But anyway, what you do to help individuals develop themselves, and I think we've touched on that just now a little bit as well. So the individual development, it could be in the context of what we have here. We help with building resilience, self-belief, independence, and the ability to own interdependence. And what that means from a prison perspective is really important, because when we're working with someone in the criminal justice system, they can become very dependent on the system and on the way that everything's given to them or provided for them in a way. And sometimes it's incredibly difficult to get someone out of that habit as well. So when they get released, for example, I've heard of stories where people have woken up in the morning where they've been released, they've gone home, they've woken up feeling like they're still in prison, so they don't leave their room all day because they're waiting for someone to unlock the door. Is that element of dependence that we need to sort of break and help people through. And that's exactly the same in mental health, within the community. So someone who's agoraphobic, for example, we may start to see people just wanting to stay inside. So how do we get them outside and build an interdependence between us, the organisation, and them as an individual, where it becomes about their independence, but also how they work with us and that kind of thing. So I'm just wondering if there's any feedback on that. And by all means, please, what do you do to help individuals develop themselves? I can look at all the organisations quite clearly that are attending this session today and see what people do, in the sense of helping people develop themselves the way they want to be developed, and that may be fitter, healthier. It could be more ambitious. It could be, like I said there, around more interdependence and the ability to be a team member and work together with others. So feedback again here is, thank you for this, is the fostering leadership and decision-making skills. So brilliant. So it's leadership, it's teaching someone about that, the individual, how to be a leader. And again, that goes back to this interdependence part here. That interdependence part, when you're a leader, it's pointless leading nobody. So what you would then teach them is, okay, so how do you lead people, and then how do you listen to people as well that you're working with, etc. It's really powerful stuff. It's great. Sharing responsibilities I've got here is another one. That's fantastic. So sharing responsibilities when it comes down to individual development, that's perfect, because what that enables people to do is kind of work together in a team, but also at the same time feel like they've contributed to it. So they have individually given to that team unit, that football club, etc. That's the start of their journey when it comes to giving back to society. So I'm going to move on to the next slide, which is slide 14. Oh, sorry, I'm just going to respond on that. Empowering skills, perfect. Exactly about that. It's about empowering the individual, giving them self-belief so that they can actually start to develop themselves. Right, we've got another one here, so I'm just going to go through that. My apologies for the breakup here, but support individuals to find their own solutions, achieve success, however big and small, perfect. That's exactly what we're doing, is supporting them to find their own, and we would use the approach, if you will, so it might be a mentoring approach, we'll say, to help them sit down with you. There may be a football session, if you will, and then part of that might be a one-to-one, where you can help them find their own solutions and achieve success, absolutely. But what does success look like for them as an individual? You would be able to, through this kind of mechanism, if you want, this part of the theory of change, you'd be able to help them achieve that success or identify what that success looks like. And as you said then, no matter how big or small that is, it's important to them. So we need to bear that in mind, and that is part of their individual development at their pace. Thank you for that, by the way. I'm just going to move on to the next one, 14. So education and training. So what we do here is we look at we're looking at education, training, volunteering, and employment. What do you offer for your participants? What do you do with them? And not just that, I think is sometimes when we say participants, I mean staff as well here. You know, in this particular framework here, learning is a big challenge for many people. You know, many people have been burnt by education systems and various other things, especially here in the UK anyway. A lot of people have kind of gone through the school system, come out the other end, and they feel like, well, what was the point in that? You know, I didn't really achieve anything. So getting them back into learning sometimes is a challenge. And that's where I guess places and spaces like prisons or clubs, if you will, football clubs and things, can have a real opportunity to look at maybe their fan base. Some of those that are middle-aged or older, for example, they want to relearn something else, you know, learn about digital technology, for example, if you're an old person. What can we do to help them, and what can we educate them on? And how do we educate them? It doesn't always have to be accredited learning, but it has to, I think it has to be in a space that's motivational for the individual. And that's where education and training through football in this context is brilliant, because what it allows you to do is have so many conversations about, okay, how do you want to be educated? What training do you want to do? There are plenty of volunteering opportunities, not just in football, but maybe in marshalling or you know, within the grounds themselves. Sometimes there's lots of volunteering opportunities to sort of support the club and be a part of something and feel like you're a part of a family, etc. And then there's also many you know, employment opportunities and whatnot when they come up. And currently under this climate, I think we're going to need to do a lot of that in the future. So I just wondered, okay, so yeah, if you don't mind, I'm assuming things are coming through. There is a bit of a delay here, so my apologies for my stutter input. Within the education and training, what we're looking at here is, I guess, what is it that you do for people? And if you have any ideas or things that you do within your space, that's something we can certainly look at. And I'll type up again some of the opportunities that I've seen, and I'll share that back with you at the end. Some of the things I've seen across the kind of conference that's come up as well. And we can start to populate the theory of change and just think about, okay, we know this works, it's quite straightforward. What is it that we do, and how does that help our individuals and our staff sort of aid us to reach the kind of final goal, which is that we have a prosocial citizen, if you will, or someone who's a proactive citizen that will go out and support their community. Because at the beginning they may have been homeless, they may have been involved in drugs, or they may have been an offender, or they may have committed crime, etc., or they may have been a victim of crime. And by the end of the support that we give them, we want them to be proactive, pro-social, and supporting their society. I'm just looking through some of the examples. No answers on question 4 so far. That's fine. There's no rush with that. But I think that's quite straightforward. I will populate some of the things that I've heard, as I said. I'm going to move on to slide 15, which is very much around the next phase, which in the chat box again, if you can, is social and community development. And I guess really, what do we want to help our participants take part of in society, in a social and community citizenship context? What do we want them to do? You know, ultimately, we want them to take part in events and sort of take part as a team and take on maybe other teams, etc., through football. So if there's any league or if there's any other events that happen, which means they need to travel, attend training, etc., etc. Brilliant. As part of a social and community group. And if they all turn up together, that means that there's a lot of people taking part in something positive, which is perfect, which is step 1, if you will. The next step then might be that we want them to give back a little bit to the clubs, or there might be opportunities for them to give back and work within this sector, within this space, and maybe support the actual football club in this case. And basically help with maybe marshalling or some of the different academy groups, the age groups, etc. There may be some opportunities for them to do that. And I think from a social and community citizenship point of view, we're also looking at helping people move on from where they were in a negative sense. So when we're looking at football for good in this sense, so it's football for development of people that may be involved in crime. We want them to be able to not be involved in crime and to be able to hold down a job. The social and community citizenship part of that is that we've achieved, if you see what I mean. That is the outcome, the ultimate outcome. Is that it could be that someone's holding down a job, they've got a house, they can now be interdependent and support a family, etc. And I think that's the kind of the end result that maybe we're all looking for in some way, shape, or form. But yeah, if you have any feedback on that and the social and community development side of things, that'd be very good. At the moment, and I feel like I'm waffling a lot here just to fill the gaps, but there's no answers so far, as I can see. And I'm going to move on, I think, in general, and just ask the question here. Really, and then just move on to the last slide, the final on the slide, and just see if I will bring all of that up together. I will type all of that up. And basically this is where we've got to now, and on the interaction side of things, and I appreciate everything that you have put up there. We'll type that up and make sure that it's all embedded into a kind of sheet that I'll make sure you get a copy of. And I guess really, if you have any other questions around the Alliance theory of change, or maybe some of the other aspects there, please let me know. Oh, brilliant. Answer to question 5. Sorry, we're starting to get there now. So empower and encourage women through the networking and sharing knowledge in order to join boards and committees. Absolutely. And that's something at leveling the playing field we're looking at as well. It's about equality, isn't it? And gender equality as well is one of those things that we have to see. It's been too long coming. And absolutely, that's the outcomes. If that's the outcome you're after, then think about all of the processes that you would want to put in place before that to ensure that I guess women through networking and sharing knowledge is great, but what do they need to be able to share and how do they do that? So if you could write the way back to the engagement part, obviously you're not going to be engaging, you might actually be engaging boards and other things, but your engagement approach would definitely be around the female kind of, I guess, market if you want, or sort of landscape and helping females understand how they can get onto the board, so there'd be a process in between, and that's where your theory of change would help you the most. But absolutely, it's something that we definitely need to focus more on, and as I said, leveling the playing field is doing that at the moment. So females and young people in the sense of from racial disparity groups as well, and it's something we need to focus on and make sure that people are on boards that should be on boards, and I think it's it's high time that boards represented society, not just a representation of a club, if that makes sense. It's also about society in which that club situates itself. Okay, so okay, and thank you, Gurko. If in a sense, the question there is that you'd like to have organisations like the Alliance of Sport in Holland. Please note that we do help organisations everywhere, and we will. But the way that we approach everything is that we would help you set one up in Holland, because obviously it's self-sustainable there. And that's something I would very much like to help do, if that's something that we would like to help. If you want that help, that's what we're here for. I believe I've got about a minute, so I'm just going to say thank you very much for your time, and I hope it's been of use. I hope it's not been too bad, and thank you for your time. It's, like I said, it's very unusual. I'm normally a person that sits in front of people rather than in front of a screen and does some talking, so my apologies if it's dragged on a bit for you, but I hope it hasn't, and I hope you've got something out of it. I will share all of this with you. Thank you very much.